killing lots and lots of people. That's all I thought about. I mean, that was my waking thought. Just like how I'm doing this and the mania with which I'm uploading the series and non-stop national security, it was like, okay, let's think about killing people today. Put yourself in the system to think about how would I construct a system that did that effectively, really come to the understanding of what it would require to really pull this off. Write that down and then destroy everything that I just spent 6 to 8 months thinking about. Well, if you did that, this would happen. So it really becomes sort of an internal dialogue. You create your own opposition, theoretically. And then you posit possibilities in your opposition, and that should be sort of reinforced. And then you respond to that opposition. So you're both playing offensive and defensive. And the idea is not so much that you hit it right on the head. It's that out of this articulation of sort of the back and forth between the defensive point, right, meaning the thesis, and then the attempt to attack the point being the antithesis, out of that, you're going to get some synthesis. It's really, really hard to do synthesis well, but it's those few gems, right? Out of, 250-page publication, if you have 80 pages with gems on them, you got a tier 1 publication, right? You got a good publication, because a lot of it is filler. A lot of the filler is an attempt to distill points until you arrive at something that's a bona fide nugget. But that filler is meaningful because you would have never arrived at that gem, at that really insightful commentary, without the logical reduction to that point. Right? So that's how I approach academic writing. I don't go in saying that I'm going to make this really insightful point on this page, or I want to address this thing, and it's going to... I let the logic lead me to the points. The points are dispersed by what I would call filler, but that filler is absolutely important, right? You have to conceptualize failure. You got to think about it. I mean, think about this just personally. Just take a quick step back, and I'm probably just going to do this point. I'm not going to do 3, so I'll pick up tomorrow on 3, because now's a good point to end after this bit. But just think about it personally. There is a sense in which you can obsess, so don't do this to a negative sense, but you don't think that because I'm an academic, I'm a professor, I got a PhD, I don't think about unemployment. I need to make sure that I live my life in such a manner that, hey, if the university says, Jason, we had a great time with you, guess what? Not enough books, not enough social contribution. They wouldn't say that to me. But listen, theoretically, you're not doing your social contribution, forget all those YouTube videos, and those books you're publishing, we don't care anymore. Get out. I have to think about systemic failure. What's going to happen to the system that I have at home? The system I have at home is my family. What's going to happen if I can't make money? So what do? I make risk assessments. I have to assess how I factor into the family, and any parent, man or woman, who has a family, who has people who rely on you, you know what this feels like. I don't have to lecture on this. You know this feeling. No, I have to. I would love to sit around and party more, but guess what? I'm going to be late for work, and I could potentially lose my job, and then I can't feed my kids, and then what? So I stuck around to hang and drink 2 more beers with you? Forget that. Similarly, in terms of, I mean, that's really sort of based, that example, but similarly, in terms of national security interests, it's I live here. I live in this is where I live. This is providing me the possibility to provide you this. Right? So irrespective of what you think, you wouldn't even be able to have this without the structure that I live within. And I live within the United States of America. And you live in your respective populations and such. But the idea is there has to be at its base a recognition of the functioning of the system. And some parts of the functioning of the systems will be bad. And all the conspiracy theorists are going to jump on that and talk about how the functioning of that part of the system is bad and blah, 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 blah. It's very rarely the case that people recognize the functioning of the system, which are good. So you need to make that assessment. You need to manage that risk. And the idea is you'll have a better theoretical framework with which to approach security, right? Because it'll be emotional. And I want to stress that. It's a hard thing to teach, but I do all of this because I'm not trying to get the paycheck so I can feed the kids. I'm sort of beyond that. I do this because I have an obligation to my family. I do this because I have an obligation to my nation. And insofar as I accept this obligation, this is the product of that obligation, is that other people benefit, right? And people who could potentially have hostile feelings towards the country that affords me the possibility to allow you to have hostile feelings, right? So that the idea is we need more of that, right? Academics, we'll let the soldiers and the generals do the fighting, because they'll need to do the fighting for defensive reasons, for offensive reasons. We, as academics, irrespective of our national affiliations, need to be able to sit at the table and recognize that we are going to disagree and that we are going to have different motivations, but that difference comes as a consequence of how we assess and manage risk. The things that affect you, that are potential risks for you in your country, are not risks for me here. It's not a good or a bad thing, it's just not a risk that I need to concern myself with. The things that are risk for me here might not be a risk for you there. So I'm just going to give one cliche, really bad, horribly generalized example just to make the point. It might be the case that a risk for you in your daily life, unfortunately, is, being bombarded with ballistics. That's a huge risk. There's no question about that, right? So that is a risk that you need to face every day. And I am not trying to say this to say that they're comparable. I recognize the comparison is not fair. I just want to give you a different type of risk, systemic risk, that I don't face that risk. I don't have an understanding of that risk here in the United States. And I recognize my privilege in not having that risk. A risk that I have that you might not have is a more systemic risk. Diabetes is a huge risk, right? Getting diabetes in the States is, you're probably more prone to getting it here. Why? Because, damn it, we got a lot of sweet stuff to eat. And I like eating sweet stuff. So I need to be aware of that, right? Because there is a systemic, there is systemically available copious amounts of sugar. And I believe there should be copious amounts of sugar available. Let's just put that on the point, make that. I'm not here saying, oh, we should start regulating that. Let the politicians make that decision. But you need to have a certain amount of willpower in order to say, no, I'm not going to do that. I'm going to do this instead. So that is a risk, right? The idea is we systemically can't sort of do this back and forth as to whose risks, what risk is more threatening, what risk has better legitimacy. There are systemic risks within any functioning system, and it's not about comparing the levels, at least at this level. There is a definite relevance in doing it in a different approach. But in this sort of risk management level, you manage the risk that you are aware of that could potentially affect you. Being bombarded with ballistics isn't a threat that to my knowledge, I'm cognizant of it, and I'm cognizant of it, I'll put it in that sense, and I make cautions for that. But the idea of the risk that I face, that I am cognizant of, is the risk of, as I was saying, exposure to too much sugar. So I make sure that the kids don't drink soda, and so on and so on and so forth. Though Daddy definitely does with his Jack Daniels. So any theory on intelligence has to address these basic ideas if it is to be effective in separating elements of risk management from intelligence, right? Risk management from intelligence, the separation, and threat analysis, which is a profoundly different process, right? Two totally different processes. One of the main things, not the main, but one of the main things I wanted to do in this lecture, and I'll continue with bullet point 3 on page 10 next time. One of the main things that I wanted to do in this lecture is to show you that in terms of intelligence, security and intelligence are different aspects. It's different aspects of the same entity, if you will, but you don't want to destabilize the functioning of the intelligence community by sort of overstepping the relationship between intelligence and security. They're two totally different entities. And to try and sort of ad hocly hold intelligence accountable for security lapses doesn't have a proper understanding of the inherency of, to be technical now, infrastructural risks. If you're talking about Benghazi, there's an infrastructural risk. That's why there is a gate. That's why there are armed guards. So there are inherent infrastructural risks that exist within the actual building itself, not intended risks that could potentially harm individuals in the building and such. So there's that. The second thing is that it is impossible to protect against the myriad, well, you don't use the article with myriad. It is impossible to protect against myriad, threats, Because all of these threats are themselves a product of intended action, and intent is a product of human imagination, so there is limitless possibility for threat. The point of the intelligence community is to set into motion those factors which they have deemed necessary to protect against likely threat. And that's all you can do. And that's all you can do. Right? And that's all you can do. So that's the best that can be attained. And it is attained with a high degree of efficiency. It really is. With that, I want to end my lecture at this point. I will continue in the next installment, top of page 10 on bullet point 3. Dr. Jason J. Campbell, and I want to thank you for taking the time to watch my videos. Have a good day.